This story is adapted from RJL5, told firsthand by a hiker named Iz. I never imagined a mountain could feel like it was choosing who might leave it alive. I thought I understood what fear was, until the forest swallowed sound and direction at the same time. People think getting lost on a hiking trail is a matter of distance, of wrong turns and fading sunlight. But it is not distance that breaks you. It is the moment the world around you stops feeling like nature and starts feeling like something watching you from the inside of the trees. We began as a group of students, young and convinced that preparation was the same as safety. We packed gear, we checked weather, we read guides, we thought we were careful. Every disaster starts with that sentence, we thought we were careful. At the base of the trail, everything still looked like a trip we would someday laugh about. No one imagines a place will try to keep them. The climb in the early hours still felt normal. The cold air bit at our faces, but it was the kind of cold you breathe through. Our footsteps had rhythm. Our talk had life. Trees passed like gates, mist curled around branches, and the mountain still felt open. There was nothing hostile yet. Nothing warning us away. The danger that kills you does not announce itself. It waits until you are far enough inside that you have no path back. I remember the first shift in feeling not fear, not even discomfort, just a strange stillness. The wind went quiet. The forest stopped sounding alive. It wasn't peaceful silence. It was the kind that feels like it is listening to you breathe. That was when I should have understood. But people don't recognize a trap until they are already stepping into it. The deeper we went, the more the trail seemed to thin beneath our feet, like we were no longer walking on a path but on permission. The kind of permission that could be taken back at any moment. And somewhere past that invisible threshold, a place no map marks at, the mountain simply decided not to let us back at the way we came. The first thing that changed was direction. Not the terrain, not the weather, a direction. Paths that seemed clear an hour earlier began branching into shapes we didn't remember passing. Landmarks we were certain we saw on the way up were suddenly gone. The forest looked the same in every direction, as if something had taken a single image of trees and copied it around us like a mirror box. At first, nobody panicked. People don't panic when they get lost, they panic when they finally admit they are lost. We were still in denial then. We kept saying maybe we missed a turn, maybe the fog was hiding familiar markers. Maybe after a few minutes the path would become obvious again. Hope is a rope that feels like safety until it tightens into your throat. The cold crept in slowly, not through the air but through the body itself. Sweat turned to ice against our backs. Fingers stiffened. The space between heartbeat and breath grew wider, slower. Hypothermia is not just temperature, it is a thinning of your will. Like the body quietly betraying the mind in order to shut down. By the time we admitted we had lost the trail, the sun was already slipping behind the canopy, and every breath we took came out like steam in dimming light. There was a moment where all of us stopped walking at the same time without speaking, as if every instinct in the group reached the same conclusion: we were not leaving this mountain before dark. And once dark came, the mountain would no longer be landscape. It would be a boundary. The sky dimmed into cold metal gray, and conversation died on its own. Not because we had nothing to say, but because speaking aloud suddenly felt like exposing ourselves. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was waiting for something. Somewhere in the distance, I thought I heard movement, not footsteps, not wind. Not animals, something slower. As if the forest itself was shifting position inch by inch. I didn't tell the others. I didn't even look behind me. When you feel hunted, turning around is the same as offering yourself. That was when one of us, Adil, began shivering uncontrollably. His words slurred, not from fear but from cold burrowing beneath his skin. His body was losing the ability to remember warmth. We formed a huddle, but the warmth we shared was slipping fast. The forest around us grew heavier with every breath, pressing inward like a mouth closing. No one said it out loud yet, but every person in that circle had the same thought. This mountain is not letting us out before it takes something from us. Hypothermia wasn't the threat, it was the doorway. And something on the other side of that doorway had already started watching. The forest began to change in ways that didn't make sense for nature. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just strong and small, quiet ways that the mind notices before it can defend itself. The first was distance. We would walk for what felt like 20 minutes, yet when we checked our progress, we hadn't actually gone anywhere. It was as if the trail bent back into itself, folding the same patch of ground beneath our shoes again and again. No climb, no descent, just a loop that pretended to be forward. The second was sound. Forests are never truly silent. There is always something, a wind, branches, insects, leaves crackling under their own weight. But this silence had a pulse to it, a waiting, like something holding its breath every time we listened. If one of us stopped walking, the stillness hardened, thick as a held scream. And then came the third change, the feeling of being counted. Like the air itself kept rechecking how many of us were left. Someone whispered my name from behind me. I turned, but everyone was still walking ahead of me. No one had spoken. The voice wasn't an echo. It was a call. Too close. Too human. Too familiar. The kind of voice that should make you feel safe, but instead empties all the warmth out of your spine. We weren't just lost. We were being guided off the path. A mountain doesn't need claws or teeth to kill you. All it has to do is convince you that the wrong direction is safe. The fog thickened until even faces a few steps ahead looked ghost-like, unfinished. Our group began closing in tightly out of instinct, as if shrinking the distance between bodies could shrink the distance between us and whatever was circling unseen. Adil's condition worsened. His hands were pale to the fingernails, like someone had poured frost straight into his bloodstream. He mumbled that he felt sleepy, the most dangerous symptom. The body asks for rest right before it shuts down for good. We stopped to wrap him in whatever remaining dry layers we had, but the cold seemed less like weather now and more like intention. Like something wanted him weak first. Fadli kept glancing over his shoulder. Nita started breathing too fast, like she was swallowing panic instead of air. I kept feeling a presence walking just outside the edge of my vision, matching our pace the way a predator follows a wounded animal. Then the trees began to look wrong, too tall, too close together, leaning inward like rib bones around a trapped lung. I realized with slow, creeping dread that this wasn't random terrain. This was a funnel. The mountain wasn't disorienting us by accident. It was hurting. And by the time we understood that, it was already too late to know what direction safety had disappeared to. The only thing left in front of us was a darkness that felt almost like a mouth. The fear didn't arrive as screaming or chaos. It arrived as doubt, a small, creeping, quiet. The mountain didn't push us. It wore us down, inch by inch, thought by thought, until we began to question our own senses. The first time I heard footsteps that didn't belong to any of us, I told myself it was imagination. But imagination doesn't walk in rhythm with your breathing. Imagination doesn't stop when you stop. Someone behind us was matching our pace. Nita whispered that she felt like we were being followed. Thadley told her to stay calm, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. When a group starts to lose its grasp on safety, silence becomes heavy, like something pressing on your back. Even our flashlight beams looked weaker, swallowed by the fog before reaching the ground. Adil kept drifting in and out, eyes half open like sleep was dragging him underwater. His lips were turning blue, and every few minutes he would mumble something we couldn't understand, like he was answering a voice we couldn't hear. Then the whispering began. Not loud, not sharp, just behind the ear. Like someone leaning in close enough that their breath should have touched the side of your neck. I couldn't make out the words. It wasn't language. It was more like intention, like something telling me to turn that way, to leave the others, to step off just a little further into the dark. I didn't move. I knew that if I turned my head, I would see something standing too close. Thadley suddenly asked if anyone had seen a small light deeper in the forest, like a guide or a sign of a trail. But there was no light. We all knew there wasn't. It was luring him, the same way the whisper was pulling at me. The danger wasn't only around us now, it was inside our judgment. That was when I realized something terrifying. The mountain wasn't trying to scare us away. It was trying to separate us. Fear wasn't the weapon. Isolation was. One by one, through cold, through confusion, through hallucination, we were being peeled away from each other, until eventually someone would walk in the wrong direction and never walk back. And it almost worked. Because at some point, I stopped being able to tell whether the people behind me were still my friends, a broken bar, or something walking in their shape. Adil's body was failing faster than the daylight. He could barely keep his balance, and every few steps his knees buckled like his bones were forgetting how to hold him up. We didn't have the luxury of choosing a direction anymore, we just had to find a place to keep him alive through the cold. The forest floor was damp, uneven, and hostile to rest, but moving any farther risked losing him entirely. Hypothermia doesn't look dramatic at first. It looks quiet, slow, almost gentle. The body tries to convince you that lying down is relief instead of surrender. Once a person lies down in that state, they don't get back up. We found a slight dip near a cluster of rocks and forced him to sit while we tried to insulate his body with whatever we had left that wasn't soaked through. His hands were so cold they didn't look like hands anymore, stiff, pale, and empty of life. His breathing was thin, slipping away like steam on glass. We huddled close to keep him warm, but the air around us kept thinning, like the cold dead weight. The moment we stopped moving, the silence grew heavier, as if something had been waiting for us to stop walking. And then came the feeling again, not being watched from a distance, but being surrounded. The darkness felt crowded, like there were shapes just beyond the reach of our lights, standing perfectly still. I didn't see them. I didn't need to. The body always recognizes a predator before the mind accepts it. Thadley kept turning his head toward the tree line, squinting like he was trying to confirm something he hoped wasn't there. Nita hugged herself, whispering that it felt like someone was walking in slow circles around us. She didn't say it to scare us. She said it like someone describing cold, simple fact, undeniable. The forest was no longer a place. It was a perimeter. Every minute we stayed there, the cold grew heavier, and the boundary of the dark pressed closer. I could hear small shifts in the undergrowth, not footsteps, but weight. Not animals, but presence. Like something out there was waiting for one of us to break formation. I remember thinking, this is how people disappear on mountains. Not by falling. Not by injury. but by standing still long enough for the dark to choose them. Adil started mumbling again, softer this time, like he was answering someone only he could hear. His eyes drifted upward into the trees, unfocused, like something above us was calling him to let go. We shook him gently, grounding him back, reminding him he was still here, but I could feel how thin that thread had become. The night wasn't hunting us quickly. It was waiting for weakness. And Adil was its first opening. Night on the mountain didn't fall like a curtain, it bled in slowly, until we looked up and realized we could no longer tell where the trees ended and the sky began. Our flashlights carved out only small, useless islands of visibility, and everything outside that pale circle was absolute black, thick enough to feel against the skin. Once darkness fully settled, the forest changed again. It no longer felt like wilderness. It felt occupied. The temperature dropped fast. Our breath came out white and trembling. Nita's teeth were chattering uncontrollably, and Fadli had gone quiet in a way that didn't feel like calm, it felt like listening for survival. Somewhere out there, beyond the rocks and the damp earth, something moved. Not walking. Not wandering. Approaching. It didn't try to hide. The sound was slow, deliberate, patient, as if whatever it was had all night to close the distance between us and it. Twigs didn't snap the way they do under animals. The rhythm was wrong. Too controlled. Too heavy. Like weight being placed, not feet stepping. I kept my eyes fixed on the dark ahead, but it was like staring into water at night. You can feel something rising long before you see it break the surface. Then Adil's head turned again, sharply, as if he had been called by name. Except none of us had spoken. His body leaned slightly in the direction of the sound, like a wire being pulled from inside his spine. We grabbed him before he could stand. He didn't resist violently, he just looked distant, unfocused, as though his mind had already stepped somewhere his body hadn't followed yet. There was another rustle. Closer now. No footsteps, just movement with weight, as if something tall was gliding rather than walking. The fog made it feel like the forest itself was inhaling around us. I realized something in that moment that made the cold sink deeper than before. Whatever was out there didn't need the light to see us. It already knew exactly where we were. Fadli whispered for us not to shine our lights toward the noise, not because he didn't want to see it, but because some part of him was terrified that if we illuminated it, it would no longer need to pretend it was hiding. The stillness tightened, like a held breath waiting to be released. And then, just at the edge of hearing, beyond the tree line, came something worse than footsteps. Breathing. Slow. Human. Deliberate. As if something on the other side of the dark was standing still and breathing back at us. Waiting for someone to answer. The breathing didn't come from one direction. It shifted left, then somewhere behind, then closer to the right, like something circling just outside the reach of the light. But nothing broke the tree line. Nothing stepped forward. It was waiting for an invitation it didn't need to ask for aloud. Adil began shaking his head slowly, whispering something under his breath. His lips barely moved, but the words had weight. They're calling. His voice sounded drained, as if the cold had seeped into his lungs. We told him to stay awake, to stay with us, but his eyes weren't seeing us anymore. They were fixed on the dark. On them. We tried to form a windbreaker around him, pulling close. His body heat faded faster and faster. I remember watching my own hands start to numb, not from outside first, but from inside outward, as if warmth wasn't being taken. It was being drawn out. That was when Nita started crying quietly. Not sobbing, just tears rolling down her face silently, like her body was reacting to something her mind couldn't process yet. She clutched her knees close, rocking slightly, her lips pressed tight to keep panic from spilling out. Thadley finally whispered what all of us were thinking but none dared to say: "Something is counting us." The moment he said it, I felt it like the darkness wasn't surrounding us, but cataloging us. Presence wasn't wandering. It was deliberate, intelligent, observant. We were no longer hikers trapped by terrain. We were inventory. Then the breathing stopped. The silence that followed wasn't relief, it was dread, sharpened into stillness. Silence means repositioning. Silence means closing in. And then, from somewhere deeper in the black, branches shifted. Not broken. Brushed aside. As if something tall had moved between them. Not creeping. Advancing. My skin tightened so violently it hurt. My instincts weren't warning me to run, they were warning me not to separate. Every part of me understood, if any one of us stepped even a few feet out of the cluster, the dark would swallow them before we even heard a scream. The forest was no longer waiting. It was preparing. Adil's breathing grew shallow and erratic. His body slumped sideways and we caught him before he fell. We didn't know if he was passing out or crossing some invisible line we couldn't pull him back from. That was when I finally let the truth settle, heavy and cold in my spine. We were not lost on the mountain anymore. We were in its possession. The first manifestation didn't come as a shape. It came as heat being pulled out of the air all at once, like the forest exhaled through us instead of around us. Our breath turned thicker, slower, and every inhale felt like dragging frost down the throat. Adil wasn't shivering anymore. That was what frightened me most. When the shivering stops, the body is past fighting. His fingers curled inward, stiff and unresponsive, like the cold was sculpting him into something that no longer belonged to the living. We tried rubbing his arms, his hands, anything to pull him back into his body, but it was like pushing warmth into stone. His eyelids fluttered and he whispered again, barely audible, like a child half asleep, "They're here." A moment later, we felt it too. Not a sound. Not a shadow. A presence so close it compressed the air around us. Something was standing just beyond the edge of our light, close enough that if one of us had reached out blindly, our hand might have touched skin or something pretending to be skin. Nita clamped a hand over her mouth to keep from making a sound. Thadley's flashlight trembled in his grip, the beam shaking across the ground like a dying signal. I forced myself not to look into the dark because a part of me already understood, if we saw its face, our fear would no longer be something we could pull back from. There was a soft shift of weight, like a foot placing itself deliberately forward. The ground responded, not like leaves being stepped on, but like soil being pressed down by something heavy. Step. Stillness. Step. And then it stopped again. Too near. Far too near. I didn't feel like we were being stalked. I felt like we were being inspected. The darkness in front of us held shape. Not visible, not defined but dense, like something occupying volume instead of space. The mind fills in what the eyes refuse to show, and every instinct in me screamed that if that thing leaned 1 inch closer, it could touch my face. I realized then that whatever surrounded us didn't need to reveal itself. Fear was already doing the work for it. Then the smell came, a cold metal, wet soil, and something faintly like rusted iron. Not decay. Not animal musk. Something older. Adil exhaled a single white breath and went limp. For a heartbeat, I thought he died. Panic surged through us, but at the exact moment we reached for him, another sound rose from the tree line, a faint at first, then layered, like more than one source, more than one distance. Breathing again. But this time a broken bar. More than one set of lungs. They weren't circling anymore. They were gathering. The moment the breathing multiplied, the night stopped feeling like darkness and started feeling like a crowd. Not voices, not footsteps, just the subtle rhythm of lungs that weren't ours, layered in different distances like a circle closing in. We pressed closer around Adele, but closeness didn't feel like safety anymore. It felt like waiting to be chosen. Flashlights trembled across the trees, but no matter where the light fell, there was nothing, only absence thick enough to hold shape. The mountain wasn't hiding them. Our senses were simply too slow to catch where they stood between one blink and the next. Nita whispered that she felt someone standing behind her shoulder, so close she could sense breath against her hair, but when she turned, there was nothing except cold hanging in the space where warmth should have been. Her voice broke when she said it didn't feel like they were watching. She said it felt like they were measuring. Fadley clenched his jaw, whispering that we couldn't stay in one spot or we'd freeze before sunrise, but I could hear the truth under his words. He wasn't afraid of the cold. He was afraid that if we stood up to move, the dark would move with us. Something shifted again, a slow, deliberate like tall weight brushing bark. The trees didn't sway like they do in wind. They tilted slightly as if something large had leaned through them. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. Not pounding, a tightening. Then came the first indirect glimpse. Not of a body, but of absence. A section of darkness darker than the rest, blocking out what little contrast the forest had. It wasn't shape you see, it was shape you notice missing. A tall silhouette, motionless, like a figure made of the same night that swallowed the trail. Fadley saw it too. I knew by the sound he made, not fear, not surprise, recognition. Recognition is worse. It means some part of you already understood it was there before your eyes confirmed it. I wanted to look away, but my eyes locked onto that dark gap where the forest should have been. A human shape, but too still. Too tall. Too silent. The kind of silence that is not the absence of sound but the refusal of sound. And then it tilted. Not walked. Not stepped. Tilted like a head lowering in slow curiosity. Acknowledging us. I stopped breathing. Something behind us answered by shifting closer. A branch bent low, wood creaked, slow pressure through bark. We were surrounded, positioned, evaluated. This wasn't wandering presence. This was formation. Not predators hunting, but sentinels closing. The forest was no longer watching us. It was enclosing us. And for the first time since the descent began, I understood a truth I hadn't wanted to name. We were not alone in the dark. We were outnumbered in it. The terror stopped feeling like emotion and started feeling like gravity, something pulling downward through the chest, heavy enough to weaken the knees. Whatever was gathering in the dark wasn't curious anymore. It was waiting for a moment of failure. A slip. A fracture in our focus. Fear wasn't the threat. Fear was the tool. Adele's breathing thinned until it was barely visible in the frost. If he slipped fully unconscious, we would lose him, not just to hypothermia, but to whatever was waiting to claim him once his body crossed the threshold between living and still. We spoke to him constantly just to keep his mind tethered, but his responses grew faint, like he was already listening to something else. Something softer than speech. Something deeper than sound. I could feel exhaustion settling in my muscles, the kind that doesn't come from climbing or cold, but from being prey, from knowing there is no safe direction, only degrees of danger. Even the forest floor felt wrong, as if the ground was no longer earth beneath us but the inside of a boundary we were not meant to cross. Space had shape now. Not physical shape, intent. Then Nita gasped. Not loud, sharp, cut off. She didn't scream. She covered her mouth the instant sound left her throat. I followed her gaze without meaning to. One of them had moved closer. Not stepping forward, simply appearing closer than before. No sound. No approach. No path. Distance had been replaced. The dark silhouette was now only a few meters away, tall enough that its outline broke the vertical rhythm of the trees. No breath. No face. Only presence, like the night itself had been carved into a figure and placed there to wait. My body reacted before my mind could. Every instinct screamed not to run, not to stand, not to draw attention, as if any sudden movement would turn observation into escalation. Fadley whispered, "Don't look at it too long," and I understood why, acknowledging it felt like permission. Behind us, another shape gathered height. Not seen, but felt a colder pressure, dense and tall, like someone standing just out of reach. Then another, farther left. Then two more behind the tree line. They weren't approaching in a line. They were encircling in a pattern. Selection, not pursuit. This was not an accident of the fog. We had been herded into a place where nothing natural could intervene. The night was no longer hiding what lived in it, it was preparing to claim what it had cornered. And at that moment, I understood the rule the mountain never says out loud. Not everyone who enters is meant to leave. Not everyone is returned. They did not attack us. They waited for us to break ourselves. The first tactic was separation, and it started with the voices. Not loud, not echoing, not monstrously familiar. That is what made it dangerous. The forest began returning our own voices to us, but not from the mouths that spoke them. I heard my name again, but this time, it was my mother's voice. Gentle, calling like she does when waking me from sleep. Behind me, somewhere deeper in the dark. I shut my eyes because I knew if I turned, my mind would follow the sound even if my body stayed still. A few seconds later, Nita heard someone calling her too. Not a stranger, a voice she trusted. She covered her ears, shaking her head, whispering no 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 under her breath because the tone was wrong. Too calm. Too coaxing. The mountain wasn't scaring us. It was inviting us. Pure fear makes you freeze. A familiar voice makes you move. And movement was all it needed. The temperature kept dropping. Our backs and legs started to ache from crouching around Adele, but standing meant exposing ourselves, and none of us were willing to become the first one to leave the small circle of shared warmth. Then Fadley whispered that he saw a dim light far between the trees again, the same direction as before. Not bright, not moving, just existing, like a guidepost. Hope is another trap the mountain uses. A false escape waiting to peel one person away at a time. I told him not to follow it. He didn't answer. His eyes stayed fixed on the glow like it was pulling at the inside of him. Meanwhile, Adil's lips had gone so pale they barely looked like lips anymore. Every few moments he tried to lift his head like he was listening to something we couldn't hear. If he got up, even by instinct, he would walk toward that voice with no resistance. And whatever waited there would take him before we could react. The circle around us tightened. Not closer physically, closer in sensation. The air got heavier. The silence thickened. It felt like if I reached my hand just a little past my knee, I would touch a body standing there. Then I realized something else, something far worse. The direction the voices came from kept changing. Not drifting. Circling. As if they were mapping which voice worked on which person. Separation wasn't random. It was customized. They were not trying to frighten us into running. They were trying to lure us into choosing our own disappearance. The first real breaking point came when Adil stopped responding to his own name. We shook him gently, called to him, tried to force his eyes to focus, but he was slipping somewhere we could not follow. He wasn't unconscious, he was listening. His breath came slow and hollow, like he was waiting for permission to stand and walk toward whatever was calling him. When Nita tried to check his pulse, she froze mid-movement. Her eyes went unfocused for a second too long, as if she heard something meant only for her. I saw the exact moment her focus cracked, her shoulders loosened, her breathing paused, and her body shifted slightly toward the trees. Not in panic, not in fear, but in surrender. I grabbed her wrist before she could get fully to her feet, and the contact shocked her back like she had been pulled out of sleep. She started crying again, terrified of herself more than of the dark. Meanwhile the breathing around us drew closer, not loud, not aggressive, inevitable. The presence pressed in like a ring, tightening around our small pocket of fading warmth. Thadley whispered that we couldn't stay here anymore or we would lose Adil entirely, but moving meant stepping into whatever was waiting. Every direction was a threat. Staying still meant freezing. Choosing wrong meant being taken. The cold was no longer just weather, it was strategy. Keep them weak, keep them desperate, make them break themselves. When I looked at Adil again, I saw a horrifying new detail. Tears were streaking down his cheeks, but his face was blank. His body was crying, but his mind was somewhere else, already answering a voice we could not hear. I realized if we waited any longer, he would simply stand up and walk into the forest without a sound, and no one would be able to stop him. The mountain wasn't trying to frighten us into running. It was waiting for the first one to drift away so the others would have to choose between staying together or chasing a ghost into the dark. They weren't hunting us. They were selecting us. And Adil was already halfway chosen. Moving him felt like announcing ourselves to whatever was closing in. But staying meant letting him slip away permanently. We braced him upright, his weight limp and uncooperative, as if the cold had replaced his bones with ice. The moment we lifted him, the breathing in the woods shifted again, not louder, not nearer, more synchronized, like multiple chests drawing in air at the same time. They knew we were about to move. They were waiting for motion. We tried to head downhill, but every direction felt wrong, like the terrain itself had rearranged beneath the fog. The slope that should have led us to lower ground suddenly felt level, and the direction that should have been back toward the trail looked steeper than before. Mountains do not change shape, and yet this one felt like it was folding us deeper rather than letting us out. We kept flashlights low, not to see forward, but to avoid seeing what might be standing ahead. Somewhere behind us, a branch bent under weight with a slow drawn creak, like something tall had anchored its hand against the trunk to lean closer. None of us turned. Instinct told us not to. Adil made a sound, then a half-breath that almost formed a word, but it wasn't ours. It wasn't meant for us. It sounded like answering. Like responding to something calling from the dark. His body tensed, not in fear but in recognition. Nita whispered, "Don't let him hear it again," but it was too late. Whatever had its attention on him was still speaking, not in sound but in pull. We tightened our hold and kept dragging him forward. But forward didn't feel like forward. Every step felt like being drawn sideways, like the ground itself was rotating under the fog. The cold thickened around our ankles like unseen water. I realized with a sudden, sharp clarity that the forest wasn't blocking our path, it was redirecting. They just had to turn us until we no longer knew how to escape. Adil's head jerked slightly, like something had touched him, not physically, but from inside his awareness. His breathing hitched. His knees buckled harder. The pull on him was stronger now, like a tether tightening. Thadley cursed under his breath, not out of anger but desperation, because he could feel it too. We were leaving with 4 people. The mountain wanted 3. And it was already trying to claim its first. The first silhouette we saw was no longer at the tree line. It was closer. Too close. Not approaching, just present, like it had been placed there when we blinked. Tall, motionless, human-shaped only in outline, but wrong in proportion. The darkness around it bent slightly, as if its presence weighed more than the space it occupied. Nita gasped and nearly dropped her side of Adil's weight. We didn't stop moving, we couldn't have, but we also didn't look directly at it again. Instinct said that acknowledgement was imitation. Then another appeared to the left. Not by stepping forward, by becoming present. No sound. No shift. Just there, where emptiness had been a moment before. A perimeter was forming in real time. They weren't blocking us randomly. They were guiding us into a narrower path. A funnel. We were being driven. The air between the silhouettes felt dense, like something unseen stretched across the metal wall we were being herded through. Behind us, there was a soft grinding of bark, like tall fingers trailing along tree trunks as something followed. Adil tried to speak again, but it came out as a breath, no language left, only surrender. His body leaned toward one of the figures without him stepping, as if his weight was being pulled. We yanked him back upright. The nearest silhouette tilted its head again, the slow, unnatural angle of something inspecting prey. It had no eyes that we could see, yet the feeling of being seen was absolute. Not curiosity. Ownership. The fog thickened around our knees. Temperature kept dropping without wind. Silence pressed into our skin like static before lightning. Every instinct screamed that the moment one of us broke formation, even by a single step, how the circle would close. Fadley whispered, "Keep walking, don't stop, don't run," voice shaking so badly it was barely a whisper. Running would shatter what little boundary we had left. Running would mean being chosen. I didn't look behind us, but I could feel more bodies gathering there too, not brushing close, not lunging, just existing a broken bar closer than before. A living barrier, waiting for weakness. We were no longer surrounded at a distance. We were being escorted. Herded like something already claimed. And the mountain hadn't even shown us its coldest hour yet. The realization came slowly, like frost creeping under the skin. We were racing distance, we were racing time. The mountain didn't need to take us by force. All it had to do was wait until our bodies couldn't fight it anymore. Exhaustion would do the rest. Cold would finish what fear began. We kept moving through the funnel of dark shapes, not freely but permitted, like cattle being directed through a chute. Every time we drifted 2 steps off course, another silhouette materialized to correct us. We were not navigating. We were being steered. And then something changed in the way they watched us. The perimeter didn't close in, it tightened focus. Like the mountain was no longer evaluating which of us would be taken first. It had decided. Adil's weight grew heavier, not because he was slipping physically, but because he was leaving us mentally. His head lolled forward, breath shallow, awareness turning inward. Every few seconds his fingers twitched like he was reaching for a hand that wasn't ours. Nita whispered that she couldn't feel her feet anymore. The cold had taken sensation from her toes upward. She gripped my arm like a lifeline because she knew that once feeling left completely, the mind would follow. Fadley was breathing through clenched teeth, not from panic, but from calculation, searching for something, anything, that could count as shelter. Trees, slope, rock, nothing offered protection. There was no barrier to brace our backs against, no corner to defend from. The entire landscape was a throat, and we were standing inside it. Then the forest ahead of us began to open slightly, not a clearing, not safety, just less suffocating density. Enough space to gather, not enough space to escape. The silhouettes shifted their formation without stepping. One moment they were scattered, the next, they had subtly repositioned, guiding us there. They wanted us in that space. A holding ground. a place of waiting. The final part of the mountain's test was not running. It was enduring. Because endurance breaks differently than fear, silently, invisibly. A person doesn't scream when their will gives out. They just stop. And all the while, the mountain counted breaths. Adil. The chosen. Nita. Weakening. Fadli. Holding the thread by force. Me. The one still aware enough to feel the trap tightening. And in that moment I understood something that made my stomach turn cold in a way the air couldn't match. We had entered a place designed for the dying. Not a campsite. Not a rest point. A waiting ground. Where the mountain watches which soul slips first. Time didn't move normally anymore. There was no sense of minutes or hours, only slipping. We talked to keep ourselves conscious, but the words weren't conversation, they were anchors. If anyone stopped speaking for too long, their awareness drifted toward the voices in the dark instead of toward us. Adil was barely breathing. His eyelids fluttered like something inside him was tugging from the other side. His chest rose shallow, mechanical, and sometimes paused too long, like his body was practicing letting go. Hypothermia doesn't just numb, it loosens the tether between the self and the body. Whatever wanted him knew that. The silhouettes didn't need to move closer. Their nearness was already inside our nerves. Every direction we weren't looking felt occupied. The air behind my head felt like a mouth breathing. The first hallucination arrived so quietly that we almost believed it was real. A warm light, a faint, golden flickered between the trees to the right. Not like a flashlight. Like a window. Like home. The kind of light your memory invents when your body starts dying. Nita saw it first. Her breath hitched and for an instant she smiled, the way someone does when they see rescue. The human brain clings to hope with teeth when death is close. She almost stood. Almost. I grabbed her before her weight shifted. The smile disappeared. Fear returned. "That's not for us," I whispered, but she already knew. The light dimmed, then vanished, not fading like distance, say extinguished like recognition had ruined its lure. Fadli muttered that he couldn't feel his fingers anymore. He flexed them hard just to make sure he still had them. Numbness crawled like frost spidering under skin. Then the forest changed again. Not sound. Not silhouette. Awareness. Every part of my body recognized it before my mind did. One of them had stepped inside the circle. Not touching. Not visible. Standing behind us. I didn't turn. Neither did Fadli. Some instincts are primal, there are things you never face directly and survive unchanged. The air behind my spine thickened like something tall was leaning forward to inspect the back of my neck. Not breathing, listening to my breathing. Its closeness was so physical I could feel the temperature of my skull shifting, colder on one side than the other. Nita felt it too. Her shoulders locked. She pressed closer to me without speaking. And then, for the first time, we heard its movement. Not around us. Not among the trees. But inside our perimeter. A slow drag of weight against soil. One deliberate reposition. Like a tall figure shifting its stance to stand over us. My throat tightened so violently I couldn't swallow. This was no longer presence. This was proximity. It wasn't surrounding us anymore. It was choosing which one of us to take first. The moment it stepped fully into our space, we did not see its face, we felt its shape. The dark behind us wasn't empty anymore. It had weight, height, intention. My scalp prickled so hard it hurt, as if instinct was trying to drag me to my knees. Everything in my body understood what my eyes refused to confirm. Something was standing close enough to touch the back of my shoulder if it chose to. And Adil reacted first. Not with movement, with surrender. His head tilted toward the unseen figure, slow and dreamlike, like a wire pulling his spine. His lips parted like he was about to speak, but what came out was something smaller than voice, a breath that sounded like agreement. He was slipping away. We gripped his arms tighter, but it didn't matter. The pull wasn't physical anymore. Something beyond flesh was already reaching through him. His body belonged to us, but his awareness was being lifted out of it inch by inch. Fadli whispered his name over and over, voice cracking like a rope fraying, but Adil's eyes rolled half open with no recognition in them. He was between us and them. The figure behind us shifted again. A faint scrape of earth. Weight settling. Listening. Another silhouette appeared in front of us, now closer than any before. Not outlined by distance, a broken bar, but occupying our forward path. Tall. Still. Deliberate. No face. No motion. Just presence sculpted into shape. The line between human and inhuman was not in the body, it was in the stillness. No living thing is that still unless it is waiting to be obeyed. Nita whispered not to look at it. She didn't have to, and none of us dared. The air began to narrow. Not colder, denser. Like there was less room to breathe inside our ribs. The silence thickened until I could hear my own pulse louder than the forest. And then the figure in front of us tilted its head. Not like curiosity. Like confirmation. Behind us, the thing standing at our backs leaned closer, not touching, but nearing the threshold of contact, the distance where one more breath would close the gap. That was when Adil's body slumped, fully limp. His head dropped forward. His breath stalled. For one horrifying second, I thought we had lost him entirely. Nita shook him, desperate, her voice breaking, but he didn't respond. The mountain had decided. Someone had to be taken. And it had already started removing him from us. His weight grew heavier as if something was claiming the last part that still belonged to the living. The dark in front of us stood still, waiting. The dark behind us breathed, a slow, deliberate, satisfied. We were seconds away from losing him. From watching him stand up and walk into the trees with no soul left in his body. From watching the mountain keep him. So the choice stopped being about escape. We had to take him back by force before something else finished taking him first. We didn't have a plan. Survival doesn't wait for plans, it moves first and thinks later. I don't even remember deciding to act. I just remember my hands gripping Adil harder, anchoring him to the ground like I was wrestling gravity itself. Because that was what it felt like, gravity pulling him upward instead of down. His body wasn't trying to fall, it was trying to leave. His pulse thinned under my fingers like a thread sawn apart. Nita started rubbing his arms, shaking him, begging him to stay awake, her voice cracking into raw panic, not fear of death, but fear of losing him to something she couldn't fight physically. Fadli leaned in close and spoke right into his ear, steady, relentless, forcing sound into him to drown out the other voice calling from the dark. At first, nothing changed. Then Adil inhaled, not fully, but sharply, like someone yanking him backward through a closing door. And the woods reacted. Not with sound. With removal. The breathing behind us stopped. Silence didn't return, it withdrew. As if the thing standing inches from our backs had straightened, recalculating. The dark ahead of us thickened. The figure no longer watched passively, it focused. I didn't have to look at it to know. I could feel the air press inward from its direction like a wall closing. Something had been interrupted. Something it believed was already complete. The taking had been interrupted. That was the first shift. The second was worse. The figure in front of us moved. Not forward. Not sideways. It bent. Slowly. Like a tall frame hinging downward to look closer. The air dropped in temperature so fast my breath came out in a violent plume. I could feel it and not touching my skin, but near enough that my body screamed and stinked without needing proof. If we lost contact with Adil now, even for a second, he would not belong to us anymore. His eyelids fluttered again. A sound slipped from his throat, almost a whimper, almost a surrender. I shook him. Nita whispered his name like a prayer. Fadli braced him from the other side, holding his head upright. The forest around us shifted. Branches flexed. Weight repositioned. The circle was no longer watching. It was preparing to close. And for the first time all night, I understood the final rule. Once the mountain begins to claim someone, you do not get a second chance to pull them back. This was the moment. Either we pulled him into the living, or the dark finished pulling him out. The moment we resisted the taking, the circle changed. It was no longer containment, it became pressure. The air thickened until breathing felt like pulling weight up through the chest. Every second we kept Adil tethered to us was a second something unseen pulled harder from the other side. The silhouettes did not advance step by step. They shortened distance by removal of space. What had been 10 meters became 5 without movement. The dark no longer lived between the trees, it pressed outward from them, a shape of intent closing in. Adil began to tremble, not violently, but like something was shaking him from inside his ribs. His breath hitched, shallow and fluttering, as if his lungs weren't sure which side to breathe for anymore. Nita kept calling his name, but her voice was breaking, thinning to panic. She was slipping toward collapse too. The sound returned then, not breathing this time, but a low shift, like fabric dragging against bark, or limbs brushing trunks in passing. Tall. Heavy. Patient. The circle was no longer waiting. It was tightening. Fadli whispered that we needed to move again, but there was nowhere to move to. The mountain had already chosen this ground as the place of taking. Forward was blocked by a figure. Behind us stood another. And between the trees, more of them waited in stillness, like ribs around a heart. Nita's knees buckled slightly as she caught herself just in time. The cold was crawling up her legs, and once the numbness reached the core, she would lose more than balance. Their strategy was obvious now. Take one fully, watch another week, and wait for the third to break, collect what remains. We were standing in the middle of a slow harvest. Adil's breathing stalled again, a gap too long. I slapped his shoulder, hard, forcing stimulus into his body. His head jerked, but his eyes didn't see me. His soul was leaning further away than his body. A low creak came from our right, a wood bowing under something leaning its weight. Not animal. Not wind. Deliberate. Patient. Closer. The figure in front of us tilted its head a second time, a deeper this time, as if acknowledging a claim already made. It did not posture. It did not threaten. It expected. The taking had been delayed, not stopped. Time wasn't slipping anymore. It was closing. I could feel it, like a door behind us slowly swinging shut, and once sealed, we would no longer be people trying to survive the night. We would be belongings. We had one narrow window, one last moment before the circle fully locked, to tear him back from whatever was pulling him under. We weren't fighting the cold. We were fighting a transfer. And the mountain was almost finished. The first time it moved with intent, the ground reacted before we did. Soil compressed in a slow, heavy shift, like weight settling downward through bone. There was no footfall, no step, just pressure, like something tall had taken one deliberate pace toward us without needing legs to do it. The shape in front of us was no longer simply present. It was participating. Nita sucked in a breath like she'd been plunged into ice water. She wasn't looking at it as she didn't need to. The body always knows when death has shortened its distance. Adil's pulse weakened beneath my fingers again, thin and distant, like someone tugging the last thread of him through a closing seam. His head lolled back and for a second there was nothing behind his eyes at all, and no panic, no resistance, only vacancy. We were losing him in real time. Fadli gripped his shoulder and spoke harder, louder, forcing sound into him the way someone forces air into a drowning man. I said his name again and again through clenched teeth because I could feel it. If his awareness let go 1 inch further, there would be nothing left to call back. The air behind us thickened again, that second presence leaning forward, hovering like it was waiting to collect what the first one had already softened. We were between 2 points of claim now, one in front, one behind. Not hunters, handlers. Nita's breathing grew fast and uneven. Panic isn't loud, it's narrow. I saw her pupils dilate and the dark hyperventilation was coming. If she spiraled, we would lose her too, and the circle would only tighten faster. They weren't taking us by force. They were stacking collapse. My hand slapped Adil's cheek, not out of anger, out of urgency. His head jerked, a tiny flicker of life, but the pull on him was so strong that consciousnness barely touched him before slipping away again. Then we heard it. Not breathing, not movement, not branches, a sound like something exhaling through him. Not from his lungs, from inside his silence. As if something was already half claiming the space where his voice used to be. I don't know what instinct pushed through me, anger, terror, refusal, but something in me snapped like a rope burning through. I grabbed both sides of his face and forced his eyes toward mine, shouting his name with everything left in my chest. For one split second, his eyes focused. Human again. Present. And the forest reacted instantly. The figure in front of us straightened. The one behind us stopped breathing. Branches flexed outward like the tree line bristled. We had interrupted the transfer a second time. And now the mountain was no longer waiting. It was deciding if it needed to answer. The next movement wasn't subtle. The ground in front of us compressed again, deeper this time, like something vast had shifted its weight forward. Not rushing. Not lunging. Claiming distance in a single silent motion. There was no mistaking it anymore. It was no longer approaching. It was stepping into the space that belonged to the living. The silhouette was close enough now that its height blocked what little ambient light the forest still held. Not a shape among trees, a shape replacing them. Without a face, it still managed to look down. The cold hit harder, like a plunge instead of a breeze. I felt it spread across my chest, a tightening that reached into my lungs. Whatever stood before us, its presence didn't touch skin, it touched breath. Behind us, the second one shifted too, not stepping but arriving closer, closing the exit we couldn't see but still felt. We were no longer surrounded at a distance. We were flanked. Nita was shaking uncontrollably now, not just from cold, from instinct. Gray shaking. Her body knew before her thoughts caught up, the moment Adil was gone, she would be next. Fadli whispered, "Don't look up, don't look at its face, don't acknowledge it." But he was whispering to himself as much as to us. He was holding his terror by the edge of a single thread. Adil's body slackened again, limp, weightless, like the bridge between him and the world had thinned to its last strand. I could feel his pulse flickering irregularly under my thumb. He wasn't just freezing. He was being let go. The thing in front of us tilted its head a third time slowly, precisely and I knew what it meant. Recognition. Confirmation. Not curiosity, not threat claim. They were waiting for his last resistance to snap. The world around us narrowed. Not the forest awareness. No sound. No wind. Just a ringing stillness, like silence condensing into pressure around our skulls. And then the tree line behind us exhaled a heavy, synchronized shift of multiple presences settling into position, like an audience leaning forward for the moment of taking. We had seconds left. Once he crossed wherever the mind goes before the body dies, Adil would no longer be reachable. He wouldn't fight because there would be no one left inside him to fight for. His body jerked once, a reflex, not a choice, and the thing ahead of us stilled in response, as if waiting for the last filament of him to break. Time had collapsed. There was no more later. Either we stole him back now, or the mountain finished its work. And from the way the cold pressed inward, we could feel it. The taking had already begun. The first true sign that it intended to collect him was the air. It didn't move inward like wind, it withdrew, like something was pulling warmth, breath, awareness outward through Adil's body. His lips parted slightly, and his chest rose in a shudder that wasn't inhalation, but release. They weren't waiting for a death of the body. They were waiting for a vacancy. I tightened my arms around him, anchoring him to the ground as if gravity alone could keep him human. Nita pressed her forehead to his shoulder, whispering, "Stay with us, stay with us, stay with us," in a voice too fragile to hold itself up. Fadli leaned in, speaking louder now, pushing sound into his ear like barrier and lifeline at once. For a moment, none of it worked. He was slipping further away. His body was here. But the him that made that body alive was already being pulled somewhere else. That was when I did the only thing that still had weight. I said his name the way someone says a final goodbye, not calling him back from fear, but calling him back from being forgotten. And that hit something. I felt it like a recoil under his skin. Not physical, a possession interrupted. The forest reacted instantly. The figure in front of us straightened sharply, the stillness breaking for the first time. Not a twitch, a withdrawal of tolerance. Behind us, branches bent in a ripple, as if several tall shapes had crossed a boundary. They had given us time and we had taken more than we were allowed. The taking was supposed to be clean. We were interfering. Adil gasped, a ragged breath tearing into his lungs at the first truly human sound he'd made in minutes. The tether pulling him away faltered. And the circle tightened in response. The shape behind us shifted closer. I could feel it and not touching, but inside the reach of a single backward stumble. The air thinned into pressure. I could sense its height above us like a weight suspended by thread. The one in front of us bent lower, beyond curiosity now, beyond selection, into enforcement. This was no longer harvesting. This was correction. Our defiance had given us a heartbeat of reprieve, but now the mountain wanted compensation. Not patience. Payment. Nita whispered, "Don't let go, don't let go, don't let go," like fear or desperation or both. Her fingers dug into his jacket like claws sunk into a ledge. Fadli braced himself like he expected impact. Adil's eyes fluttered again, a faint, uncertain but present. And that presence made us a problem. We hadn't lost him. Which meant the mountain hadn't won him. That was the moment the forest stopped watching us and started coming for us. What happened next wasn't movement in the way living things move. There was no step, no advance, no sound of approach. The space between us and the figure simply ceased to exist. One breath it was several meters away, the next it was close enough that I could feel heat being taken from my skin. Viewing it directly still wasn't possible. The eyes don't fail and the mind refuses. What stood in front of us was shape without detail, gravity without form. No limbs. No face. Only presence that pressed inward, like standing at the edge of something bottomless and being felt from below. And behind us, a second presence sealed whatever retreat instinct tried to generate. It wasn't blocking a path, it was erasing the idea of escape altogether. My heartbeat slowed, not from calm, but from the body preparing for shutdown. Shock. The silence was so complete that even our breathing sounded like trespass. Adil stirred weakly. Not returning a resisting. And the resisting made the pressure increase. His body was the contested object. Every inhale we forced into him was a theft from whatever had nearly finished taking him. Then, for the first time, the thing in front of us made a sound. Not a voice. A resonance. Deep, subhuman, like vibration inside bone rather than air, a low frequency that rattled through the ribs, bypassing hearing entirely. Nita clutched her chest. Fadley's jaw locked. I felt the back of my eyes sting, like the body bracing to collapse inward. That was command. Not to move, to yield. To release him. This was the moment they expected us to give up. The circle tightened a final increment. I didn't have to look to know more of them had stepped into range. I could feel them, like cold pillars planted into the earth around us, forming a radius of no return. The message was absolute: one life has been chosen. Return him, or join him. And yet I didn't let go. Fadley didn't. Nita didn't. We held him not with strength, but with refusal. Not today. Not here. Not yours. And the refusal is what made it escalate. The presence in front of us bent lower, slow, deliberate, as if lowering its head to the level of a thing it intended to claim by hand instead of intent. There was no more distance left. The next move would not be warning. It would be taking. The air dropped a killing cold. And something vast and formless leaned into the space between breath and body as if reaching to finish what we had interrupted. The moment of taking didn't come as a strike, it came as collapse. The air inside our lungs thinned like we were suddenly breathing through ice. My vision tunneled at the edges, not from fear, but from something pressing down on awareness itself, like a hand closing over the top of the mind. Knees weakened. Balance slipped. Instinct screamed to release what we were holding. That was the method, not force, a surrender. If we dropped him, if we even loosened our grip, the mountain would finish the transfer without needing another second. Adil's breathing stalled again, chest barely lifting. I could feel his pulse weakening under my thumb, slower broken bar fading. Nita whispered his name, but her voice came out like air more than speech. She was losing strength too. Fadley's arms trembled from holding him upright. Even his determination was beginning to buckle under the weight pressing into our ribs. The presence leaning over us lowered further. Close enough now that I could feel a boundary, not skin, not touch, but a line of temperature as thin as a blade at the edge of my cheek. Something ancient was inches from my face. Not threatening. Claiming. The force behind us shifted again as synchronized repositioning of many bodies, like rows tightening formation. Not approaching to attack. Approaching to receive. We were not being hunted anymore. We were being collected. I felt my grip loosen for half a heartbeat, not by choice, but by drain. The strength leaving my hands didn't feel like fatigue. It felt taken. The shape in front of us straightened slightly, almost in anticipation. It expected the release. That was its mistake. Because instead of letting go, I pulled him closer. Our defiance cracked the stillness like a fracture in glass. The air snapped back a fraction. Not retreat, a disruption. The connection was interrupted again. And for the first time, the thing reacted. Not by sound. Not by stepping. But by presence snapping into sharp focus and awareness so direct it felt like a gaze pressed into the center of my skull. We had refused a claim. And now, we were no longer undeserving witnesses. We were obstacles. That was the shift. Before this moment, we were being sorted. After this moment, we became a problem that required correction. The silence wasn't passive anymore. It was a threat waiting to land. The next move would not be coaxing. The next move would be removal. And I understood with bone-deep clarity. The mountain was done being patient. The escalation didn't arrive with noise, it arrived with absence. Not the absence of sound, but the sudden absence of distance. What little space we had left was taken all at once, like something closing its hand around us without needing to move a single limb. Breath left my lungs in a shudder I didn't choose. A survival instinct I didn't know I had fired through every nerve in my body: do not release him. The presence bent closer. Not symbolically, physically. There was no breath, no heat, only a cold so sharp it felt like my bones were being hollowed from the inside. I could feel it studying me from inches away, not confused, not challenged. Offended. It had expected obedience. It had expected completion. We had interfered twice. There would not be a third warning. Somewhere behind us, the tree line shifted, several of them repositioning in unison, sealing whatever exit illusion my brain still clung to. The circle was now a wall. We weren't surrounded. We were enclosed. Adele's body jerked once, violently, like something was trying to pull him straight upward through his spine. Nita let out a broken sound and locked her arms around him in reflex. Fadley braced his entire weight into holding him upright. I felt a tear run down my own face and freeze before it could drop from my chin. He was being pulled through us. His pulse flickered, then stuttered. Not gone. Not alive. Between. That was what they wanted, not a corpse, a vacancy. My voice cracked as I called his name again, louder than before, not as a plea, but as an order to his body to stay tethered. The world around us vibrated in response, a low bass rumble beneath hearing range, like the forest itself growled through the soil. That was the warning: stop resisting. We didn't. So the mountain changed tactics. The cold shifted from around us to into us and targeted draining, not of temperature, but of will. My arms started to numb from the inside outward. My grip slipped slightly, and the presence in front of us leaned closer like a predator watching prey lose balance. This was the moment it meant to take him. No more patience. No more waiting. One more second of weakness and he would be gone. His head began to tilt backward again, eyes rolling half open, that empty half-conscious stare sliding across his face like a curtain being drawn. I felt him slipping, not physically, spiritually. And that was when I understood the last truth. We weren't just holding his body. We were holding the doorway closed. And the mountain was now pushing from the other side. There was no fear left at that point. Just the raw, burning instinct of refusal. Not yours. Not yet. Not this one. The presence in front of us stilled, preparing to finish what it started. Behind us, the others leaned in. Decision had ended. The taking was about to begin. The moment to cross the boundary was different from everything before. There was no warning, no shift in temperature, no approach. It simply entered. A crushing weight sank straight through my sternum like a second heartbeat that didn't belong to me. My knees buckled, and for a split second I felt something inside me go quiet, like a door I didn't know I had almost opened from the inside. Adil jerked again, harder this time, like someone was pulling him upward by invisible hooks behind his ribs. His eyes were open now but empty, staring past us, fixed on something above the tree line. Not seeing or answering. Fadley swore under his breath and pulled him tighter. Nita started reciting whatever prayer came into her head, voice shaking but unbroken. The presence in front of us lowered like a shadow folding inward, tightening its grip on him through whatever tether it had sunk into his chest. And that was the moment we understood, if we stayed here, even another minute, he would be gone. Flight wasn't strategy anymore. Flight was the only way left. I shouted not words, just command and Fadley hoisted Adil over his shoulder in a single desperate motion. The circuit around us rippled. Not breaking reacting. The instant we moved, the forest erupted in motion like dozens of bodies shifting in pursuit all at once. We didn't run at first, we stumbled, dragging him through the dark. The cold followed not as weather as intent. Pressure slammed into our backs like a wave, trying to slow our steps, like wading through water that thickened with every meter. The tree line behind us cracked, branches bending inward, not from wind. From presence moving too fast to see. They weren't just watching now. They were coming after him. Our headlamps glitched, flickering in unison, then extinguished completely. The path ahead vanished. Only the weight of pursuit remained, closing, tightening, collapsing the gap. I didn't look back. Looking back wasn't courage, it was imitation. We forced our way downhill by memory and instinct, slipping, stumbling, half sliding through the slope. Every meter put a fraction of distance between us and the ridge, but the air behind us kept compressing like something massive was closing the world in around our ankles. Around the halfway point, Adil started thrashing, not like a sick person, like someone trying to turn toward the thing calling him. Fadley nearly lost his grip. Nita grabbed his arm to steady him and nearly fell herself. I had to shout his name right in his ear to drag him back into his body long enough for his muscles to slacken again. But even unconscious, he wasn't letting go of them. They still had a hold through him. The trees thinned. The last ridge dropped. The forest broke just enough for air to move again. And that was when whatever followed us stopped. Not because it couldn't continue, but because it didn't need to. The claim had been interrupted, not severed. They knew where he would sleep. Where he would recover. Where he would be alone. Taking him later would cost them nothing. The mountain doesn't chase. It waits. In the days that followed, his body returned before his awareness did. He could stand. He could speak. He could walk. But he wasn't present in the way a person should be. Conversations drifted through him like wind through an open room. When we tried to talk about what happened on the ridge, he didn't avoid the subject. He simply behaved like he wasn't the one being asked. Sometimes he would pause mid-movement, like listening to something the rest of us could not hear. Sleep made it worse. The first night after descending, he jolted awake with his hands clawed into the mattress, not screaming, not gasping, just staring at the ceiling as though something was waiting above him. When Fadley shook him, he whispered only one sentence. "It keeps calling me back." The second night, he woke standing, not lying down, facing the window, both hands pressed against the glass. He didn't remember moving there. By the third, he stopped sleeping at all. His mother said his body would tense when he closed his eyes, like he was bracing for impact. When he finally did fall asleep, he would slip halfway conscious again, mouth half open as if he was responding to someone none of us could see. Not possessed. Not delirious. Linked. The mountain had not failed, it had been interrupted. His pulse would sometimes slow to that same unnatural rhythm from the ridge, like something still aligning itself inside his chest. His temperature dropped without reason, especially near sunset, as if the cold had memorized him. The worst moment came a week later, near dawn, when he walked out of the house barefoot, silent, unaware, straight toward the road that leads back toward the hills. They found him before he reached the main path. When they shook him awake, he looked confused and said he was only going to get air. He had no memory of leaving his room. There was a point where we stopped asking what followed him down, and the better question was what still thought he belonged somewhere else. Some mountains don't take people by killing them on the trail. Some take them by keeping a door open just wide enough for return. To this day, he refuses to climb anything higher than a street curb. Not because of fear, but because when elevation rises and silence deepens, he hears it again, not a voice, not a threat, a summons waiting to be completed. He didn't survive a haunting. He survived a claim interrupted. And claims, once made.
Thank you for watching. Please like, comment and subscribe. Bye bye.